Jacqueline Walker entered her own restaurant as if she were just any other guest, only to face blatant discrimination. The waiter, unaware of her identity, rudely told her to leave, claiming it wasn't her kind of place. Once she revealed her role as the owner, his confidence crumbled, sparking a reckoning that would stun even seasoned onlookers. But let's rewind a bit. Jacqueline Walker was a woman whose steady gaze and upright posture spoke of strength and determination forged over decades of overcoming obstacles. Nearing 50, her unwavering commitment to discipline and perseverance had kept her looking much younger, with a radiance that came from within rather than any artificial effort. Her dark, thick hair, liberally streaked with hints of gray, framed her high cheekbones, giving her an air of both wisdom and authority. Her poised but reserved smile was one of quiet resilience, a reflection of her life's journey, filled with challenges and triumphs that had taught her to stay grounded and focused. Everything about Jacqueline exuded professionalism and inner resolve, from the way she moved to the careful consideration behind each of her style choices. Today, she had chosen to dress in a way that wouldn't draw undue attention, a look that was effortless, but not unrefined. Her dark jeans and crisp white blouse, paired with low-heeled classic shoes, gave her a chic yet unpretentious appearance. She might have been mistaken for someone merely coming in for an everyday lunch, but for those who looked closer, there was a presence about her, a strength that commanded silent respect. Upon stepping into the restaurant, Jacqueline's instincts sharpened as she caught the piercing gaze of a waiter stationed near the counter. He was young, neatly groomed, with a confident, slightly smug expression that softened just barely as he met her eyes. It was his gaze, however, that conveyed far more than politeness. It was a restrained smirk tinged with subtle disdain, reminding her of people who judged on appearances alone. Jacqueline sensed his appraisal, a quick, dismissive scan that landed on her simple attire and labeled her as less worthy of respect. She'd encountered this silent judgment before, particularly early in her career, where assumptions about her had been made based on her appearance and background. But Jacqueline had long since learned not to let such biases disrupt her composure. Remaining calm, she chose a seat by the window, her face framed by the soft light filtering through, and politely asked for a menu. Her request, simple as it was, received only a perfunctory response. Brian, the waiter, barely glanced at her as he pointed to a sign on the wall behind him. "Reservations required." His tone was clipped and formal, but with an edge that hinted at irritation. It was clear he believed she wasn't deserving of his attention or respect, as if her appearance somehow marked her as unworthy. His dismissive sneer carried an arrogance Jacqueline knew all too well, triggering memories of past encounters with people who had written her off before even knowing her story. Jacqueline felt the sting of those early days as she recalled the pain of being underestimated for her skin color and her reserved demeanor. There had been times when the discrimination was blatant, and others when it simmered under the surface, masked by polite phrases and forced smiles. But the years had taught her patience and resilience. She'd learned to observe rather than react, a skill honed from countless encounters with people quick to judge. She knew better than to reveal her identity or confront him directly. At least, not yet. Instead, Jacqueline decided to wait, observing just how far Brian would let his bias guide his actions. It was a test, one she had not set for him, but one he was unwittingly taking, each word and glance revealing his character more than he realized. Brian, a man in his 30s with a clean-shaven face and the posture of a waiter who spent too long in one place, exuded arrogance in his manner and speech. His perfectly ironed uniform, in his eyes, symbolized the high standards of the establishment. Seeing that Jacqueline wasn't in a rush to leave, he approached her with a sharp, almost irritated look, his steps brisk and his face sullen. Leaning down, he began to speak loudly and demonstratively, trying to draw the attention of nearby patrons. "You don't belong here. We don't serve people who don't fit our image. he declared with an edge of contempt in his voice, straightening as if expecting his words to crush her spirit. Brian scanned her judgmentally, clearly convinced she was the wrong kind of person for his restaurant. His eyes gleamed with resolve. He believed both management and customers would support his actions. Jacqueline struggled to contain her anger, feeling her patience stretch thin, though she maintained a composed exterior. She was confident she could handle the situation and had no intention of creating a scene. Yet Brian, sensing her restraint, decided to press even harder. His voice grew louder, and his words became more condescending. The scene began to attract the attention of the staff standing nearby. However, no one dared to intervene. Colleagues who knew Brian's impulsive nature were wary of engaging in an argument with him. Only one cook, standing nearby and clearly disturbed by the events, took out his phone to record the incident, intending to keep evidence in case the situation escalated. Noticing this, Brian flushed with anger. His face turned red, and he lunged toward the cook, demanding the video be deleted. "Put that phone away! Do you understand what you're doing?" he hissed, shoulders tense, threatening the cook with consequences for his unacceptable behavior. Brian seemed almost out of control with rage. After enduring minutes of humiliation and condescension, Jacqueline finally lifted her gaze and spoke with an icy calm. "My name is Jacqueline Walker, and I am the owner of this restaurant." Her words were quiet, yet in the silence of the room, they landed like a thunderclap. Brian's face displayed a mixture of shock and fear. It seemed as though all color drained from his face as he realized his rudeness and arrogance were directed at the woman who not only had every right to be there, but held his future in her hands. He looked around, as if hoping this was some kind of bad joke. However, the expressions of the staff and patrons, full of respect and newfound admiration for Jacqueline, confirmed that this was no joke. At that moment, the cook, who had been recording the incident, nodded quietly to Jacqueline in support. Her resolute gaze and composure made it clear to the entire room who was truly in charge. Realizing the gravity of his mistake, Brian, now with fear in his voice, began to stammer, making excuses, desperately trying to lessen the consequences. But Jacqueline cut him off with a single wave of her hand and, in a cold tone, ordered him to leave. "Your actions not only failed our service standards, but demonstrated an unacceptable prejudice that is incompatible with our values," she stated firmly, holding his gaze without flinching. Everyone in the room, including the other staff, observed in silence. Jacqueline's words carried not only her authority, but also a profound, principled belief in equality and respect for all guests. Brian, understanding there was no way to cover up his actions, lowered his head and left the restaurant, not daring to look back. After the incident, Jacqueline gathered the entire restaurant staff for an urgent meeting in the main dining area. The employees, sensing the seriousness of the situation, nervously took their seats, aware of the tense atmosphere in the air. Jacqueline, maintaining her usual calm, stood before them, but her gaze was stern and unwavering. She began by explaining the fundamental principle that her restaurants operated by. Every guest should feel valued and respected. "We're here not only to offer dishes, but to create an atmosphere where everyone feels welcome. Prejudice and arrogance have no place within these walls," she said, making eye contact with each employee. Her voice was filled with resolve, and each person felt the weight of her words. Jacqueline emphasized that the incident with Brian was a stark example of how personal biases could not only damage the restaurant's reputation, but also undermine the very principles on which her business was built. Meanwhile, the video the cook recorded had already circulated on social media, sparking an outcry. People across the country expressed their outrage, supporting Jacqueline and viewing her actions as those of a strong, principled leader. Online comments poured in with support and admiration, with many calling her a hero. Some even shared personal stories, underscoring the importance of a leader who stood against bias and discrimination. Brian, realizing the depth of his actions and the consequences that followed, tried to apologize, but to Jacqueline and the entire team, it no longer mattered. Her firm stance demonstrated that prejudice and arrogance were costly errors. His apologies, now powerless, only highlighted the depth of his downfall and his inability to change what had happened. This incident became a lesson for all of Jacqueline's restaurant staff. They understood that prejudice led only to failure, while success could be achieved solely through genuine respect for everyone. Now, every employee knew they represented a company that tolerated not even the slightest hint of discrimination.